Wyoming Territory, 1883. The wind howled down from the Bighorn Mountains as Selene Farnell gripped the reins with cracked hands and prayed the horse would not give out before she reached anywhere safe. Her dress was torn from branches, her lips split from where her husband had struck her before she fled. Blood dried down her temple, crusted into her hairline. A bruise bloomed across her cheekbone, dark like the thunderclouds behind her. She had ridden for 2 days, barely stopping, knowing he would come after her. She was 22, and already she had lived through more hurt than most women twice her age. Her husband, Walter, was a man with a cruel mouth and quicker fists. He owned land south of Cheyenne, and he owned her too. Until last night, when he struck her toddler's head against the wall because little Bria would not stop crying from hunger, something inside Selene broke free. She had grabbed Bria, wrapped her in a blanket, and ran. She left behind everything but her daughter and her fear. Now the child slept against her chest in a sling, small arms tucked close to her body. Selene's body ached from riding double, but she would not complain. Her girl was safe. That was all that mattered. The sun was dipping behind the ridgeline when she saw the ranch house low and square, with smoke curling from the chimney and corral fences stretching long. She did not know the name of the place, only that it was shelter. She pressed her heels to the horse's sides and rode straight across the pasture. A man stepped from the barn as she approached, tall and broad-shouldered with a rifle in his hand. He did not raise it, just stood there watching her come. She pulled up the mare, breath shallow. "Please," she said, voice hoarse, "I need help." He walked forward, slow, careful. He wore a weathered hat, a flannel shirt tucked into worn denims, and his boots were caked in mud. His jaw was square, dark stubble shadowing it, and his eyes were the color of storm clouds. "You hurt?" he asked. "Not bad," she said. "My daughter, she needs food and we need to hide." He looked at her a long moment, then at the child. Bria stirred in the sling, let out a whimper. He lowered the rifle. "Come inside." He led her through the yard, up a small porch, and into a warm, dim kitchen. The scent of stew lingered in the air. A kettle hissed on the stove. He pulled out a chair for her. "What's your name?" he asked as he ladled stew into a bowl. "Selene Farnell. That's my daughter, Bria," he nodded once. "Quillan Ashford." "Folks call me Quill." He set the bowl in front of her, then fetched a clean rag and dipped it in a basin. He handed it over gently. "You look like hell, ma'am. I feel worse." She spooned bits of carrot and potato into Bria's mouth, who ate like she had never seen food before. Quill leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching them both like a man trying to piece together a story without asking too much. Selene looked up. "We cannot stay long. He will come looking." "Your husband," she nodded. "Is he law?" "No, just mean and rich." Quill's expression darkened. "You have any papers, proof you are married?" "I burned them." He studied her again, quiet. Then he said, "You can stay here. For now, no one knows this ranch but the man who sold it to me, and he is 6 counties away." "Why would you help a stranger?" he shrugged. "You do not look like someone who lies, and the girl, she should not have to pay for whatever he did." Selene blinked hard. No one had ever spoken like that about her child. Not once. That night, Quill gave her his bed and slept in the barn with the dogs. She lay awake, Bria curled beneath her arm, listening to the wind scratch at the windows. She had not felt safe in years. And now, in this stranger's house, she let herself breathe. The next morning, Quill was chopping wood when she stepped out with Bria on her hip. He looked up and his eyes softened. Not in pity, she had seen enough of that to know, but something gentler than that. "Respect, maybe. You can stay as long as you need," he said, setting the axe down. "I got work here, but I can pay you if you help with meals and the chickens." "I do not need paying. I do not ask charity from anyone, not even pretty women on the run," she flushed. "All right, I will earn my keep," and that was the start of it. Selene worked in the kitchen while Bria napped, cooked with what little they had. Quill taught her how to feed the horses, how to check the fencing. He never touched her, never stood too close. But he made her laugh once, and she had almost forgotten she could. By the end of the week, she caught him watching her from the porch. Not in a way that made her shrink, no, it made her stand taller. One evening, Bria toddled to Quill with her arms open. He scooped her up without hesitation, holding her like she was something easy and light. Selene stood frozen, watching as her daughter tucked her head beneath his chin and sighed. "She likes you," Selene said. He looked at her over the girl's dark curls. "I like her too." They ate dinner together every night. She added little touches to the meal's biscuits with honey, potatoes mashed soft for Bria. He started fixing the broken door hinges, as if he planned to keep the place ready for more than himself. One night after Bria was asleep, Selene sat on the porch steps. Quill joined her, sitting quiet. The sky was wide and black, full of stars. "You ever think about leaving this place?" she asked. He shrugged. "I came out here to get away from folks. No one needs much from me. It is quiet." "I thought quiet was all I wanted too, but I think I want a little more now." He turned to her. "Like what?" She looked at him, his face shadowed in the moonlight. "Like someone to sit beside." He did not speak, just reached his hand over and took hers, rough calluses against her fingers. She did not pull away, and for the first time in years she felt something like hope. The snow came early that year, sweeping down from the high passes and laying a thin white skin over the pasture. It clung to the fence rails and softened the sound of boots on the ground. Selene stood at the window, watching flakes drift down like ash. Bria's small hand wrapped around her finger as the child leaned into her leg. Quill had gone out before dawn to check the western troughs. He hadn't said much, just pulled his coat on and tipped his hat in her direction before stepping into the cold. Selene had grown used to the quiet way he moved through the world, how he never filled space with more words than were needed. It made her feel steadier, like the silence meant nothing bad was coming. Bria tugged at her skirt. "Cold," she whispered. Selene crouched and wrapped her daughter in the wool shawl she'd found in a cedar chest by the stairs. "We'll stay inside today." "No need to go out." The girl nodded, eyes wide and dark, then toddled toward the hearth where the fire still burned low. With Bria occupied, Selene turned back to the window. She saw Quill then, walking up the slope with a burlap sack slung over one shoulder and snow piled on the brim of his hat. When he stepped inside, the warmth of the kitchen fogged his lashes. He set the sack down by the door and shook the snow from his shoulders. "Pump froze on the south side," he said. "Had to break it loose with a pick." Selene poured him the last of the coffee and passed it to him without speaking. He took it with a nod and leaned against the wall, cupping the mug in his hands. "I didn't ask before," she said after a moment, "but how long you been out here alone?" He glanced at her, then at the fire. 8 years this spring. That's a long time." He sipped the coffee before answering. "Wasn't planning on company." "I wasn't planning to be anyone's." He looked at her then, long enough that she felt it in her chest. She turned her eyes down to the pot she'd set on the stove. "Bria's teeth are coming in. She keeps waking." He took a slow breath. "I can fix a cradle." "Something that'll rock." Selene blinked. "You do that, it's no trouble." That night, after Bria had fallen asleep curled in a quilt, Selene stepped out to the barn. The air was sharp, the stars brittle and cold above her. She found Quill sitting on a stool, shaping pine boards with a drawknife. The cradle was half-built, curved runners smoothed out and the sides already notched. "You weren't joking," she said, stepping inside and closing the door behind her. He wiped his hands on a cloth and looked up. "She ought to rest easier. You too." Selene leaned against the post, arms folded. "My father was a cooper, used to let me hold the staves while he banded them." Quill kept planing the wood, slow and steady. "You miss him." "Passed when I was 16. He was the only one who ever told me I could be more than someone's wife." I reckon he was right. She watched the way his hands moved, precise and sure, no wasted motion. "Why did you come all the way out here?" she asked. "Left Tennessee after my brother was killed in a mine collapse. Nothing held me there after that. And now," he set the tool down, "now I fix what's in front of me." Selene stepped closer, her voice quiet. "You've done more for me in 2 weeks than anyone else has in years." He didn't look up. "You didn't deserve what came before." She reached out, touching the cradle rail. "Neither did Bria." "No, she didn't." He stood slowly, the air between them tightening. But she's got someone now who won't fail her. Selene's throat caught. So do I. They stood like that, close without touching, until the wind rattled the eaves and Bria's soft cry floated in from the house. Selene turned toward the sound, but Quill's hand came up, resting lightly on her arm. "I'll get her," he said. She nodded, unable to speak. Later, as she lay in bed with Bria nestled beside her, she watched Quill from the doorway. He stood by the cradle he'd finished, one hand resting on its edge, watching the child sleep. Selene whispered into the dark, more to herself than to him. "We're not running anymore." Quill didn't speak, but he stayed there long after the child's breathing settled. And for the first time in her life, Selene let herself believe that someone would stand between her and the world. Not because he had to, because he wanted to. The days shortened, and the frost deepened. Quill's cattle grazed close to the barn now, and the thin blue light of morning lasted only until the sky turned gray again. Selene pulled water from the well with stiff fingers, her breath visible as she carried the pail inside. Bria was on the quilt with a wooden spoon, tapping it rhythmically against a tin pan Quill had given her to play with. The cradle sat near the hearth now, its curved legs casting long shadows on the floor. Quill came in through the back, his coat dusted with snow, holding a wrapped parcel. He set it on the table, untying the twine with a small flourish. Mail rider passed through last night, left this with the supplies. Selene dried her hands on her apron. "We aren't expecting anything." Quill removed the brown paper to reveal a hardcover book, the edges worn, the title pressed in dull gold. "Found it secondhand. Fella up in Buffalo owed me a favor." She stepped closer. "A book of stories, fairy tales." Thought maybe Bria would like the pictures. Selene traced the cover with the tips of her fingers. "I haven't read anything in years." He pulled off his gloves. "You should. It's winter now, nights are long." She turned a page. The illustrations were simple woodcuts, mostly, but they held a charm that caught her. Bria toddled over, drawn by the rustle, and climbed into her lap. Selene showed her the drawings, pointing out the little characters and animals, her voice slow and soft as she sounded out the words. Quill leaned against the wall as the child laughed. "You've got a good reading voice." "I used to read to my mother, before she got sick." He didn't ask more, and she didn't offer. The quiet between them held steady, not heavy. She thought of that often now, how nothing between them ever strained. Each day fell into place like it had been waiting to. That night, after Bria was settled, Selene stepped outside with a wool shawl drawn tight. Quill was by the woodpile, stacking the last of the split logs under the awning. The lantern beside him threw a warm glow, catching the steam of his breath. She stopped a few paces away. "You didn't have to get that book. I know. It was kind. It's been a long time since anyone did something just to make things easier." He turned then, voice low. "You make this place lighter." "That's worth something." She stepped closer, boots crunching on the frozen ground. "You make it steady." He didn't reach for her, didn't move, just held her gaze like he was giving her time to decide. She closed the last of the distance herself, laying her palm against his chest. His heart beat solid beneath her hand. "I don't know how to say everything I want to," she said. "You don't have to." He bent his head slow, and she met him halfway. The kiss wasn't rushed. It had no urgency in it, just a quiet certainty. When they pulled apart, her breath caught in the cold air, but her hands stayed where they were. Later, back inside, she watched him carry Bria from the cradle to the quilt near the fire, settling her gently without waking her. He tucked the blanket around her, his movements careful and practiced. Selene stood in the doorway, her arms folded. "You're good with her. She's easy to love." "So am I," she said, voice barely louder than the tick of the stove. Quill turned. "Then let me." She crossed the room, rested her head against his shoulder. He wrapped his arms around her, not tight, just enough to say he wasn't letting go. The fire crackled low, the wind pressing against the windows. But inside it was warm, and safe, and full. The days slipped past in the hush of deep winter. Snow settled in the seams of the land like it belonged there. and the wind no longer felt like something to brace against, it was just part of the rhythm. Selene hung laundry near the stove, pinning Bria's little dresses to the twine line Quill had strung across the rafters. The girl sat on the floor humming tunelessly, cradling a rag doll Quill had stitched together from scraps. In the evenings now, Selene didn't wait for Quill to come in from the barn. She met him halfway, coat pulled tight and lantern swinging from her hand. They didn't say much on those walks back to the house, but he always matched his pace to hers, and she always carried the light. One night, as she folded a quilt over the back of the chair, Quill leaned against the door frame. "You ever think about what comes next?" he asked. She looked up from the fabric. "You mean spring?" "I mean all of it." Selene set the quilt aside. "I don't make plans anymore. I used to, but they never held." He stepped into the room. "Maybe they didn't hold because you weren't in the right place." She met his eyes. "And this is, I think so." He sat at the table, hands resting flat on the worn wood. She crossed to him and sat across, her fingers brushing the edge of his. "I don't know what it means to stay. Not really." He didn't move his hand, just let it stay there between them. "You already are." The next morning, Quill saddled 2 horses. Bria had fallen back asleep after breakfast, and Selene stood on the porch, wrapping a scarf around her neck. "Where are we going?" she asked as he handed her the reins. "Up toward the ridge." "There's something I want you to see." The trail was narrow and wound through cottonwoods stripped bare for the season. Snow had crusted over the path, but the horses moved steady beneath them. They didn't speak much, just the sound of hooves and the rustle of branches overhead. At the top, the valley opened wide, the river below half frozen and shining like glass. A hawk circled above them, its cry sharp against the silence. Quill dismounted and tied his horse to a low branch. Selene did the same, her breath rising in clouds around her. "This was my brother's favorite spot," he said. "He used to bring a flask and talk about building a cabin up here." She stepped to the edge, boots crunching. "It's beautiful. I come here when I need to remember what I still have." Selene turned toward him. "You lost him. And still you built something steady." "I had to. When you lose someone like that, it leaves a hole, but you can choose what fills it." She stepped close, her gloved hand resting against his coat. "And what have you filled it with?" He took her hand and didn't let go. "You, Bria." "All of this?" The wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and snow. She leaned into him, her cheek brushing his collar. "I want to stay," she whispered. "You already are." They rode back slow, the sun dipping low behind the hills. When they got home, Bria was just waking from her nap. Selene lifted her into her arms, and the girl wrapped her arms around her neck, warm and soft. Quill kissed Selene's temple once, then took Bria from her arms with practiced ease. She watched them together, and something settled inside her chest, quiet and sure. Later that night, after Bria had fallen asleep in the cradle Quill had carved, Selene sat beside him on the edge of the bed. She touched the side of his face, the line of his jaw rough with stubble. "I don't want to wait anymore," she said. He turned toward her, eyes steady. "Then don't." She kissed him slow, her hand resting over his heart. When they lay down together, it wasn't hurried or uncertain. It was the kind of closeness that came after long silences and shared bread and the slow building of trust. In the stillness that followed, Quill reached for her hand beneath the quilt. "You don't ever have to run again," he said. She pressed her forehead to his. "I won't, not from you." Outside, the storm passed. Inside, the lantern burned low, and peace earned and quiet settled over them like warmth in the cold. By early March, the thaw had begun to eat at the snowbanks, peeling them back from the fence posts and revealing patches of brittle grass beneath. The air still bit in the mornings, but it no longer carried the sharpness of deep winter. Selene stood just outside the barn, her sleeves rolled up as she scrubbed a wooden bucket with coarse salt. She could hear Bria inside, babbling to herself as she arranged smooth stones on a wool blanket. Quill had carved her a little bench near the hearth where she could sit and play, and she'd taken to lining up whatever small treasures she found, measuring the world in her own way. Quill emerged from the corral with his shoulders dusted in hay, and his gloves tucked into his belt. He didn't call out, didn't need to. Selene looked up as he approached, wiping her hands on her apron. "Franklin Tersall passed through this morning," he said. "Said Walter's been asking after you down in Cheyenne." She straightened slowly. "How close?" "He's been to 3 homesteads in the last week. Franklin didn't tell him anything, but the man's still asking." Selene didn't flinch. "Then we'll be ready if he finds his way here." Quill met her gaze. "I've already cleared a space in the root cellar. It's dry and it's got a lock from the inside. I'm not hiding anymore, I know. That's only if you need time to get Bria safe," her hands stilled against the apron. "He won't take her." "No," Quill said. "He won't." She studied him a moment longer, then nodded once. "I trust you." That night, Selene sat at the kitchen table mending the hem of one of Quill's shirts, the fire casting dull light across her lap. He was outside, checking the hinges on the barn doors again. He'd been quiet since the news of her husband's search, not worried but watchful, as if he were counting every moment they still had untouched. Bria slept deep in her cradle, thumb tucked beneath her chin. The wind had settled into a lull, and the only sound was the pop of the fire and the small scrape of needle through cloth. When Quill came back in, he paused in the doorway, brushing dirt from his palms. "You're always fixing something," he said. "So are you." He sat beside her and watched her work a moment. "There's a circuit judge riding through in 2 weeks. I was thinking we could have him by, make it official." Selene blinked, needle paused mid-stitch. "You want to marry me?" "I do." She set the shirt aside. "Not just for Bria's sake. No, for yours and mine." He reached across the table, brushing his hand against hers. "I want a life with you, not just a shelter." Selene looked at their hands, then at him. "I never thought I'd have the kind of love that didn't come with fear. You do now." She stood and came around the table, kneeling beside his chair. "I've never been asked before, not like that. I'm asking." She leaned into him, her head resting just beneath his collarbone. "Then my answer's yes." They married in the yard beneath a sky just beginning to green at the edges. The circuit judge stood stiff-legged beside the porch, his voice thin in the wind, but it didn't matter. Bria held wildflowers in her hands, her dress too big and her smile too wide. Selene wore a blue ribbon in her hair, the same one her mother had given her when she turned 15. Quill took her hands in his, and when she looked up at him, she saw everything she'd never dared to hope for. Afterward, they ate bread and dried fruit and drank coffee from tin cups. They didn't need more. That night, as the fire burned low and Bria slept curled in her new quilt, Selene stood in the doorway and watched the stars blink awake. Quill came up behind her, resting his hands on her waist. "Cold?" "No," she said. "Not anymore." He kissed her shoulder, then her neck, slow and certain. "I'm glad you found your way here." "I didn't know it was home," she said. "Until it was." They raised Bria with quiet steadiness, teaching her how to ride, how to knead bread, how to listen to the wind before it turned. Selene planted herbs in the spring, and Quill built a smokehouse with his own hands. They didn't speak much of the past. It had no place here. Walter never found them. By the time the circuit court finalized the papers that stripped him of any claim, he'd already moved on to another town, another drink, another woman to break. But Selene never looked over her shoulder again. Years passed, and the house grew fuller with laughter, with the scrape of chairs and the creak of old floorboards and the worn pages of the same storybook, read aloud under lamplight. Bria grew into a strong, bright girl with her mother's sharp eyes and a laugh that could fill a room. She never once called Quill anything but father. Selene kept the ribbon in her hair the day they watched Bria ride out on her first horse alone. Quill stood beside her, his arm around her shoulders, and they didn't need to speak. Everything worth saying had already been built between them, steady as the land beneath their feet, and they stayed, together, always.